Council for having us. My name is Hilary Morgan. I'm with McCullough Development Services. And I'll let Joanne introduce herself.
I'm Joanne Mata. I'm with Nelson Cares Society, Housing Director.
And so the intent of tonight's presentation is to provide an update on some of the project specifics and hopefully get a commitment, a financial commitment from the regional district as part of this whole project. As you guys know, the team on this project is McCullough as the development consultant, Cover is the architect, and Nelson Cares is the nonprofit operator. Just a reminder of what the building looks like and the program for the building. It is a 6-story building with 50 residential units, 14 studios, 32 one-bedrooms, 2 two-bedrooms, and 2 three-bedrooms. All units will be adaptable. 3 of the units will be fully accessible. The building will achieve step code 3. And we've got studio units along Front Street to activate the street frontage. This slide provides an overview of the different spaces in the building. So where you see the sort of lighter bump out on Front Street, that is the NDCC expansion. And then there's studio apartments along front on the main floor. And then there's 2 accesses to parking. And the rest of the development is residential use. Nelson Cares is seeking funding through the BC Housing's Community Housing Fund. This means that 30% of the units will be near market rentals, 50% will be rent geared to income, which means tenants pay 30% of their household income to rent, and 20% will be deeply affordable units for people who earn less than $30,000 per year for their entire household. CHF provides a portion of funding in the form of a loan or mortgage, and a portion in the form of a grant. So at the end of this project, Nelson Cares will hold a mortgage for the development. The chart is just a reminder of housing need in Nelson. Based on the housing needs report, there is a need for 457 rental units by next year. And this development would directly contribute to filling that gap.
Councillor Woodward,
just
question.
a technical piece. There's a feedback happening in the gallery. Maybe slightly turning down that possible. Thank you.
So can you hear back there? And I shouldn't be the one that asks that because everybody can hear me. But some lower, can you say something and see if they can hear it?
Testing, or is it me?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it's you, but sometimes it's also us. But Jesse, could you just say something, please?
Testing.
Oh, this one that has the low voice.
I don't say much, so I'm gonna just say this. Can you hear that?
Okay.
Back there?
Yeah.
Sweet.
If at any moment you don't hear us, please kind of wave. These guys are watching. We had a really bad technical problem with our last public hearing, and the people couldn't hear the presentations, and so we just are still trying to get the room balanced. Continue on.
The process for the Community Housing Fund, we're currently in the pre-CHF submission phase, so we've been working on due diligence work and schematic design and rezoning. The project has funding through BC Housing's preliminary development funding. That money is in the form of a loan, and we're still waiting for the Community Housing Fund to open. Hopefully that will happen soon. BC Housing will issue a request for proposals, and we will put together the funding application and find out if the project is approved. The Community Housing Fund is a competitive process, so nonprofit organizations across BC will be applying for this funding, and BC Housing scores projects based on different criteria. This slide just lists some of the different criteria that BC Housing considers when they're scoring projects. We also know that the recently announced budget does not indicate that the CHF program will continue, so we don't know when it will come back. And there's also a list of some previous winners from the interior region, so ranging from 9 units in Trail to 90 units in Summerland. So quite a spectrum of types of developments. One of the things I want to highlight on this slide is we do recommend that nonprofits work really hard to get their site rezoned before applying for CHF. Having the zoning in place is going to result in a better score and reduce risk for the development to move forward. So that's sort of a minimum criteria we recommend to societies before they apply for CHF. In terms of this project and how it's structured with the partnership, the RDCK would, so as you can see on the slide, the blue piece of land is owned by the regional district and the orange is owned by the city of Nelson. And so the building has been designed so that the recreation component of the project is only on the blue space. And so the Nelson Cares would hold a lease with the regional district. Nelson Cares would be responsible for paying the mortgage on the new building. So the regional district is not providing upfront capital for the project. Instead, they would be paying back the cost of the project through a long-term lease agreement.
Councillor yep. Whoa, okay, let's do that's, you really guys are testing me today. Councillor Tate and then Councillor Woodward.
Thank you.
Could you repeat that? I didn't understand your sentence about the lease.
So the regional district would lease the recreation space from Nelson Cares. And then, so yeah, the regional district would be responsible for paying a lease. That being said, if the regional district was able to provide capital between now and, the project being built, then that would be drawn down from the overall costs and the mortgage for that space.
Councillor Woodward.
Thank you, Mayor. To the chair. With the recreation piece, is Nelson Cares responsible for like liability and let's say cleaning, care? Who takes care of that part of the building?
Those details will be worked out through the lease agreement. The goal is that we would separate the systems in the building as much as possible. So for example, the regional district has their own utility bills and things like that. And as for cleaning, it would probably, it would be up to the regional district, but given it's a connection to their existing space, they probably want to work with their existing systems for that. But that is part of what is a bit unknown at this point, is what are the operating costs. We know the lease will be made up of, the cost of the lease will be made up of the cost of the monthly mortgage payments plus operating costs. We don't know exactly what operating costs are yet. In terms of insurance, typically it's the operator who has to carry insurance for the operations of their use, so.
Just supplemental, Mayor?
Sure.
The envelope, so obviously Nelson Cares would have a capital reserve taking care of the envelope and the roof. Would they also be responsible for that part of the building, or?
And again, the lease would kind of clarify those terms. I will note that the NDCC space is meant to be sort of a shell, so it would be like the regional district would be responsible for tenant improvements to fit out the space to exactly what they want. I think it would be similar to a commercial lease where the Nelson Cares as the landlord is responsible for maybe like building related issues, but the tenant is responsible for everything within that unit.
Thank you.
This slide speaks to some of the benefits of partnering on BC Housing funded projects. So there's two examples of projects that combine non-residential uses with affordable housing. One is a childcare in Valemount. The other is childcare with affordable housing in Saanich. It's really great when we can make these projects work because there's broader community benefit beyond just the housing. There can be efficiencies in co-locating uses. We all know in Nelson there's also limited land, so using land as efficiently as possible is a goal. Some of the challenges with this partnership in particular are the fact that the regional district is not providing upfront capital. It presents some financing challenges. We've talked to BC Housing about it, and they've ultimately told us that so long as the regional district can commit to a 35-year lease, then that risk is significantly reduced. And financing should be made possible, but originally there were some concerns about underwriting a mortgage for the NDC space if there wasn't certainty for revenues for that space. So the long-term lease, BC Housing has indicated they would be supportive of that. The other thing is there's a lot of conversation, I think, in the community about could the recreation space be increased in size? And one of the limiting factors is that BC Housing does have a max, their priority is providing new housing units. So they'll only consider projects that have up to 30% of the gross floor area dedicated to non-residential uses. And I won't say that 30% is a automatic given. It's, again, it goes through the competitive process through CHF. 30% is just the absolute maximum. So those are some of the tricky things with the project that we've encountered.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Councilor Wade.
Thank you. On the Hall Street project, Nelson Cares has their main office there. So that's a little bit similar in the sense of like having another space. And I guess my question would be, Joanne, that how does that, like, how do you do insurance and care and with your part of the building being used as a commercial space?
Yeah, so Nelson Cares offices, they do pay rent, so by program. So the advocacy center is broken down by program based on the square footage that they use. So it is kept separate from the resident side and the office side. So there is different accounting for each side, yeah.
So it'd be similar.
Similar,
I imagine, than
yeah.
this one. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Sorry.
Councilor Tate.
Before you go too far, because I see the next slides are gonna generate a ton of questions. On slide 6, that PDF, I think that's pre-development funding of $250,000. It says that is a loan. So no matter what, Nelson Cares is on the hook for that, because I'm curious, because I thought that was something that was already received.
It has been received. Typically how it is handled is when the project starts construction, the PDF is paid, because CHF provides a grant and a loan, PDF is paid back through the grant portion, is typically how it works. So if a project isn't realized, or if a project isn't funded or something like that, it's kind of BC Housing would be the one to decide if they would pursue forcing a society to pay that money back.
Okay.
I think that's, yeah.
Thank you.
But the intent of those monies is to help, understand the pre-development required to understand the project feasibility.
Thank you.
Quickly, riffing off that, do you have a sense of what percentage of projects that get the PDF funds end up not going to full? Like, is it usually a pretty strong indicator that if there's financing and a project comes together that they'll go through, or do they see a lot of rejections? Are there a lot of those out there evaluating, conceptualizing projects that just never go anywhere?
I might ask Kayla, who's on the virtually, to pop in since she's got.
Kayla, run the numbers.
Kayla, do you?
What I would say is that BC Housing has gone through different iterations of issuing PDF. Earlier, like maybe 7-8 years ago, they were issuing PDF on this exploratory phase, and projects did not move forward. The last maybe 5 years or so, no PDF if you weren't funded. Not even an option. So this round of getting PDF prior to getting full project funding is new to BC Housing currently and a bit unique. So I think it's hard to comment, but they issued a lot. I do know they issued a lot. So
Number on the number of projects?
okay, for us alone, I would say we probably have upwards of 20-25 projects that have PDF right now across the province, and that's just us.
That's good, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Kayla. Now we're gonna dive into the numbers, so thank you, good segue. The recreation space, so the NDCC expansion is around 5,000 square feet, double height ceilings. The total building is 68,000 square feet. So the NDCC space represents 8% of gross floor area, but it does have double height ceilings, so it could be interpreted to be more like 16% of the building. The cost, based on Class D cost estimates for the NDCC portion, is estimated to be $4 million. The total construction cost is estimated to be $35 million. This is all based on a Class D hard cost estimate prepared by a quantity surveyor. As I mentioned, the NDCC cost excludes fit out, so they're responsible for tenant improvements. It also assumes that NDCC carries 8% of site works and foundation costs, and assumes a contingency of 15% of hard costs and 18% of soft costs. And soft costs include all of the engineering and design fees, but also offsite works, municipal fees, municipal connections. So the soft costs includes quite a bit. So the total cost of the NDC space is estimated at around 12% of the total building costs. So this chart or table rather is showing what a mortgage on this space would look like. At a 4.52% interest rate over 35 years, the monthly payment required would be around $19,000. So as I mentioned before, the lease payment will be a combination of mortgage costs plus operating costs. So we're estimating that the regional district will be responsible for lease payments ranging from $20,000 to $25,000 per month. Yeah, there's questions?
Councillor Woodward.
Sorry, Councillor Payne?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just ask where the interest rate is from? Is that
The interest rate is based on numbers that we receive from funders. They sort of give us updates on what we should project for future interest rates.
So it's averaged out over 35 years.
Yeah, it's
As much as anyone can do with
Yeah.
a crystal ball and a.
yeah, but at takeout, the 4.52% is based on when the project would be done construction, assuming that's the interest rate.
Councillor Woodward.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm curious as to where the NDCC would get cost recovery on this big new bill.
I think Joe is going to speak to
Yeah, I think that we're gonna have some discussion later on, Councillor Woodward, regarding that.
Okay, thank you.
So, just sort of providing an overview. Just the lack of upfront capital is different in this project, I would say, than a lot of the non-residential, residential mixed-use projects that we see. It doesn't mean it's impossible, it's just that commitment of a 35-year lease in the range of $20,000 to $25,000 per month is really critical at this point in the project before we sort of continue on with the zoning and CHF application. Another consideration that I haven't talked about yet is we currently have 2 stories of parking. It is very expensive and does not generate any revenue. So I anticipate that any scenario that comes back to you for first, second reading will include reduced parking and replacing some of that parking with housing units. We know that there's some sort of organized recreation groups that are advocating for a different type of recreation space. And just reinforcing the importance of zoning this site before we apply for CHF. Again, we don't know exactly when CHF will open and when it will close, but we're anticipating near the end of July is when we have to have the site zoned in order to put in a really strong CHF application.
That's one question. Joanne, what's your history or your experience with parking at the Hall Street place? Like how many cars per
I
number of
believe
units?
that we have around 40 spaces. Only half of those spaces are utilized by residents. We have a lot of extra parking there, so our staff at the office are able to utilize that parking area. A lot of the people who are living at that location do not have vehicles, and that's what actually for many of our sites, that is the case. The only site that I would say there's a shortage would be probably Lakeside Place, where people are in transition, letting go of their vehicles. But for most of our sites, there is adequate parking, if not empty parking spots.
So we're hoping that the elected officials will consider and provide some direction on these 2 options. Option 1 is to move forward with the planned housing and NDCC expansion. In order to do that, we would need a commitment on the 35-year lease estimated at the cost of $20,000 to $25,000. We would also like to request support for looking at some reductions in parking to increase housing units. The current design is 50 units, and if we were to remove half of one of the stories of parking, we could get it up to 55 units. If we reduced the full second story of parking, it would be 60 units. And option 2 would be to move forward without the NDC space and with a housing only project on city-owned land. Because of the loss of that RDCK portion, the number of units would go down to 42 units. However, if we were able to reduce parking, we could get between 46 to 51 units.
Councilor Forward.
Thank you. Through the chair, I am curious to know in terms of the matrix that goes to the people who are deciding this, which of these would be most favorable, I guess, in terms of less complexity, more straightforward. Like if this was to go ahead, we obviously want it to have its best chance of getting built. So I'm just wondering, out of these two, what do you think?
I knew you were going to ask that. I'll walk through these sort of risks and benefits and then maybe try to summarize. So some of the risks with the first option with the recreation plus housing, we're working with Class D cost estimates at this time. Costs could increase or decrease. Nelson Cares is assuming the risk for the mortgage on the NDC space. There is the challenge of underwriting the mortgage. However, we know from BC Housing that a long-term lease could overcome that challenge. We know there's some opposition from the recreation community regarding the desire for a larger gymnasium. The benefits are that the regional district would get the fitness center that they know, the fitness center expansion that they know that they need. And the community would get 50 to 60 affordable rental housing units delivered. When we look at option 2, housing only on city land, there is lower financing risks. Still potential for recreation community to oppose the development. Some people would like to see the whole site used for recreation. There is the loss of 8 units. However, I've noted those could be replaced if we reduced parking and no fitness center expansion. The benefits being you get in your community 42 to 51 affordable housing units delivered, more time to plan for recreation infrastructure, and reduced risk for Nelson Cares as the organization holding the mortgage. I don't think I can state which project is going to score higher in BC Housing's eyes. I think I can say what can I say? That the long-term lease is absolutely critical at this point. If a CHF application went in without that commitment, I would say for sure option 2 would score much higher.
Right.
So yeah.
So Hillary, is there not a third option where the RDCK makes their plot available without recreation?
That's option, is that not option 2? Am I where the RDCK, sorry, can you repeat?
So that all 4 lots would be available without warehousing?
That's an option 2.
Yeah.
But
These are the 2 you worked on, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know we like lots of options.
All right, so this is essentially the summary of what we're seeking direction on is whether the elected officials would like to move forward with option 1 or option 2, and if option 1 is the case, we will require that commitment from the regional district as soon as possible. And then I just really want to be upfront about the fact that we will be looking at reduced parking options as part of what we'll be bringing forward for the rezoning. And we work with Nelson Cares and with the planners of the city to ensure that what we propose is reasonable and is going to be operationally, functional. But this is really hoping that tonight we can, get a decision regarding the financial commitment. And that is the end of the presentation.
Okay. Councillors, do you have any further questions based on the Councillor Tate?
Thanks so much. Thanks for pulling this together. I also pulled the presentation from the open houses that's on your website. Thanks for always keeping that information really transparent and available. I found it really fast. Click, click, click. I have a curiosity when you're talking about some of the feedback from other community partners, the sport community, as we've heard a lot from them, which I'm super excited about, galvanize, organize, optimize. Has there been any conversations about just cutting out the government portion of it entirely and going Nelson Cares sport partnership? Sometimes when you have two nonprofits, you can leverage all sorts of funding. Have there been any meetings, conversations, ideas generated?
No, I did try and reach out to the Sports Council. I have not heard back from them.
Are there any precedents of two nonprofit kind of partnerships where you're leveraging two types of grants, that sort of thing?
Yeah, the childcares are a really good example. So those are the Ministry of Education and Childcare's New Spaces Fund will provide up to usually $3 million for a childcare space, and then BC Housing provides the housing. And so the projects happen concurrently, and usually, in some cases, there's two nonprofits, and often there are, because often organizations that operate nonprofit housing aren't necessarily childcare operators.
Right. And then like separate, okay, so no conversations. But another question would be, what about leasing as opposed to leveraging and partnering and doing it together? Is there any possibility of leasing to a different nonprofit that's not the RDCK or a different for-profit, just a different entity other than the RDCK? Have those conversations been had with any community partners? No. Just curious. Thank you.
Council forward.
Thank you. Are we gonna hear from the RDCK?
We do have another meeting scheduled after this, so
Okay, so we will hear from them.
there's some things that fall under the Local Government Act that require us to go in camera.
Thank you.
So we are gonna
Mhm.
if there's any questions.
So if there's no other questions from council, I want to thank Nicola, Hillary for coming, and Joanna for coming, and some of your board members that are sitting back there. And our next order of business is to go into in camera, so. Thank you. Thank you for being available and bringing us up to date, because this was great. I think the community's been waiting to hear this, and of course, it'll now be out there, wherever the out there is. Thanks.
Thank you. Apparently the website.
On the Nelson Cares website?
Yeah.
Where?
I said apparently.
No, the slides from the public engagement are there. So that was showing me like the floor plans.
Imagine this whole.
Oh, I gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, can I have a resolution to close the meeting to the public? It is the opinion of